Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Opapari, and this is the Songwriters on Process podcast. Since 2010, I've been interviewing songwriters about their writing process. And on this podcast, we go deep, deep, deep into the writing process, far deeper than the usual. Do you start with the lyrics or the music question? By way of background, I have a PhD in English literature, and I'm a prose writer myself. I'm not a songwriter. In fact, I've never written a song in my life. But my goal has always been to treat songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers and poets, just as writers, plain and simple, and I've always been interested in the writing process. This is an intelligent conversation between two writers. And on this podcast, like I said, we go deep into the process. We talk about rituals, the seeds of inspiration, the role of movement on the process, writer's block, the revision process, pens, pencils, types of paper, and of course, we talk about books. You can find all the archived interviews on the Songwriters on Podcast website and across all streaming platforms. And with that, let's dive into this week's episode. And today on the podcast, it's Lee Tasjan. Tasjan's new album, Stellar Evolution, is out now on Blue Elon Records. I have to say, I really like this album. And the first track, Alien Space Queen, I heard it once, and it was an earworm. I literally, the first time I played it, I think I heard it, and I walked away and did something else before I listened to the rest of the album, and I could not get that chorus out of my mind. I mean, all the songs are good, but that one right off the bat, the first track, it was like, it's an earworm in a good way if I've ever heard it. But the whole album's great, but that first track I just love. This podcast, this episode is really a lesson in the minutia of the process. I think we spent 5 to 10 minutes talking about pens, pencils, and erasers. Actually, not pens, because here's his process. And I'll quote him directly, "I never liked erasers. He only writes with a pencil, but he never uses the eraser." I don't know what to do with that, but I found that fascinating. But he doesn't like pens. He has to write with a pencil, but he doesn't use the eraser. Here's the process. Gets up around 8 o'clock in the morning, drinks a big glass of water and pets the cat, and he writes when his body tells him to. And I love the ritual of that, right? The water and petting the cats, and we went into great detail about that. But as you'll hear in the podcast, when I ask him if he has a favorite room, there's a favorite room in the house with a big window, but he's got that very specific process. And I just love the minutia of that discussion. So I think you'll find that interesting. And the other thing is that he likes to start by taking a deep breath, he says, to pull the air into his skull. He doesn't read a lot, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But like some songwriters, he uses art galleries as a way to get inspired. And Hemingway once said that all artists should go to art galleries to get inspired. So we talk a lot about how the Frist Art Gallery in Nashville, where he lives, how that's a big source of inspiration for him. So all of that, we had a lot of fun. Again, the new album, Stellar Evolution, is out now on Blue Elon Records. It is great. And with that, my episode with Lee Tasjan. Are you an everyday writer, or do you just write when the mood strikes? I find that some songwriters, whether that's songwriting or journal writing, some people feel like you've got to create every day. Others are very firm on only when the mood strikes. Where do you fit into that?
I've done it both ways. I've never. I've always subscribed to the Bob Dylan philosophy of, if an artist feels like they've arrived at something, that's one of the only times they're ever in trouble. So I kind of try to stay in the flow of, my sort of natural energy, and listen to my body. And sometimes it feels like every cell in my body is like screaming out for me to just get up every day and write, and I do. And when I'm feeling that, that's what I do. I kind of get up, generally most days around 8:30 in the morning, and the times when I'm writing, I'll probably drink a big glass of water, and maybe pet the cat for a minute, and then just kind of go right into it, and see what I can get going, just kind of off of yesterday's fumes. But there's other times where I almost, somebody told me this one time, and I'm trying to remember who it was that said this to me, but they were saying, the headspace that you have to be in, to write a song where you're sort of more of, you're much more permeable than you usually would be. You're kind of letting everything in, you're taking everything in. And I'm also like a super sensitive empath kind of dude. So I'm kind of default to that, sometimes more than I probably should anyway. Um, so, songwriting is kind of that headspace too. And it's like you can't stay there, forever, or you kind of you start to take on too many, every news story you read. It's like you're really just feeling every word of what the story is. And if it's something, that's sad that happened to somebody or something like that, it's like you really feel that. So I've had to learn to navigate. I've had to learn to be a bit intuitive about it, and kind of, yeah, just listen to my body and feel kind of where my head and heart are, and respond accordingly. I really like I feel like I used to really like set all these specific things that I was, at one point, back in like 2015 or something, I did one of those things where I'm going to write this every day. I'm going to write one song for the whole year, kind of a thing. And that was great, and that was, and a great exercise. And I learned a lot from doing it. But mostly what I learned was that I don't have a specific way of, approaching my, how often I'm writing, but but I try to be mindful of what my body is kind of telling me around my creativity.
Okay, a couple of follow-ups. The first is,
Yeah.
if your body is not telling you that for an extended period of time, do you get
Yeah.
anxious?
Um, I'm kind of I'm kind of always anxious. So yeah, but I don't know how much of it directly correlates to, like I suppose I've been fortunate in that, you know, I also, in addition to writing songs for my own projects, I also am very fortunate that people will call me in to help write for their projects as well. And what I love about that experience is it kind of gets me out of my own internal process
Mm.
of doing it for me, and forces me to think about it in other ways, and just have a different perception of what it is, and what I'm actually doing. Uh, I feel like it's one of those things where it can be really easy to get caught up in the idea of being a songwriter, because it is kind of, romantic in a lot of ways. I mean, you hear these stories about someone like Elliott Smith, like, oh yeah, he went in the bar and he just sat in the corner and he just kind of observed people and wrote these incredible songs. And that does sound really, really cool. But I try really hard as much as I can to make it about doing the work, whatever the work is, whether it's ready for me or for someone else. And I feel like in that way, I've sort of have managed so far in my life to eschew um, the worry of like a writer's block or something like that.
I had Brett Daniel from Spoon on the podcast, and he told me exactly what he I'd love to see the scene, but he said that he will sometimes sit in a bar with his laptop and listen to conversations and type out. I would love to see Britt Daniel in the corner of a pub, like, and he literally will sit there and listen, and he'll write lines down. I thought that's amazing.
I
Um,
love it.
I've
I
heard
love
that.
it.
I mean, I've heard,
Yeah,
I had John Oates on, and John Oates told me he was one of the lines for one of his songs was he was in the airport in Denver, and some woman was talking to her friend at the table next to him and heard this woman said something to her friend, and he said, that's going to be a song title. Um, some tell me they get external. So I've heard some tell me they get melody ideas from turn signals or from car alarms. So how often does that happen to you?
um I oh gosh, yeah. I am sure that I can't think of like a specific example right now.
Or covered
Um
bridges. I've heard covered going over, gosh, the guy from Fantagram, this is years ago, told me that they live in Josh Carter. I think he said that going over covered bridges in upstate New York, that bump, 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 gives him ideas. I thought that was so cool.
I love it. I heard that Harry Nilsson wrote one from the dial tone of the phone. Boop, 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 boop. One is the loneliest number that you live. That's how he came up with it, was hearing the dial tone on the phone.
That's amazing. I love those ideas. Like something is so what so what fascinates me about that is that back in the day, do kids even know what a dial tone is? That's another issue altogether, right?
Fair, very fair.
Right. Or pick up the phone. What does that even mean? Dial a number. But what I love about that is the idea that how often we hear turn signals every day. We hear car alarms every day. We hear dial tones every day. What is it that you hear at that one time? And it's like, wow, that's a song idea. And that, even though you heard it probably 20 times in that day alone, I don't know the answer to that is, but I find that's such a cool idea that, wow, that you hear a dial tone and at that moment, that's a song idea.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I really feel like like songs, you know, maybe, melodies, lyrics, like they all kind of exist, just kind of out there. And songwriters, find ways to be a channel between the space where those things are just floating around and, the gravity of the reality that we all live in. And they find ways to pull those things down, you know, and interpret them. And that those things can just come from anywhere, you know. And I think that's what you learn as a songwriter. It's almost like being like a collector of some kind. You're kind of always open to what might be a song, you know, and um and so and what I love about that process is you never know until you've gone through it whether or not that's true. Like you can have a thing come, and a lyric idea or a melody idea or something, and kind of craft a whole little story and world around it in your mind and get that down on paper, and then realize after you've done it, like, oh yeah, for whatever, number of a myriad of possible reasons, it just isn't working out the way that I thought it would, you know. Um
Well, I was going
and
to say,
and and yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, please. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The other thing is you did something, and that is all songwriters do this. You made this motion where you're grabbing things out of the air, right? No songwriter has ever said to me, "Yeah, it was on the ground and I picked it up, or it was on a table." I don't know. I don't know what to do with that information, but I think it's so cool that it's always that same motion. It's in the air. It's never. And it maybe I don't know, but I think that's so funny. Yeah, I was walking along and that song was on the ground and I picked it up. It's always in the air.
I think, yeah, I think songs, that makes sense to me because, music's, beautiful music, great music, even sad, heavy music, if it's cathartic for me, it makes me feel lighter, you
Mm-mm.
know? So, and I've heard, I heard Tom Waits say one time, music is just something really interesting to be doing with the air,
Hmm.
you know? So I feel like that, the music, it's, yeah, it's up here, and it's floating around us, and it's just kind of, I mean, what's that old saying? There's music in the air, and I think that, that's so true on, because of what we were just talking about, the sound of wheels on a gravel road, the sound of a crow, calling off of a telephone wire, like all of those things are music, and could potentially be, an idea for a lyric or a melody or a rhythm, or, any of that kind of stuff. And so I think ultimately, you know, for me, writing, and trying to share my experience, or observe someone else's experience and share my interpretation or perception of that, I have to look up and out. I
Yep.
can't only stay in. I mean, I'm oftentimes relating my inner life, outwardly. I mean, that's part of the gig of songwriting. But I think in order to do that effectively, I also have to have an awareness of what's in front of me and around me, so that I can reflect those experiences in a way that other people will understand and relate to them too.
Now you mentioned paper. I
Yeah.
could do an entire probably website dedicated to the preferred types of paper and and color of ink and brands of pen that songwriter. You have no idea. I mean, again, like I had Jerry Harrison of the Talking Heads on a couple months ago. He said it has to be a felt tip pen because he loves the sensation of the scraping. I love that, the scraping. He feels like when he's the tactile, the experience, it makes him feel like he's accomplishing something if there's scraping involved.
I
Um,
love it.
so are you a pen and paper person when it comes to lyrics or a computer person?
Well, I'm trying to find one of my pencils here that seems to have gone missing.
Oh, and that's a whole other
Um,
thing, pen versus pencil. We'll get into that too. This is always a raging debate.
yeah, I had it around here somewhere. That's unfortunate. I would love to have shown it to you. But yeah, yeah, pencils, all the way, you know. I never use, even though I'm using a pencil, I never use the eraser. I'm
Oh
always
boy. Okay. So I find this fascinating. So because why not just use a pen if you're not using the eraser? I love this.
right, right. I know. Um, a couple of reasons. One is just the pure romanticism of one of my favorite songwriters of all time, Guy Clark, who was very specific about pencils and paper and all of those kind of things. And it's a very dear friend whom I've written songs with, and we even wrote the song "Ocean Drive" together from my current record. Brian Wright, and he'd written with Guy a bunch when Guy was still around, and I got to meet Guy too. We never got to write together, but I did get to meet him and have a really cool experience doing that. And so, I don't know. In a lot of ways, you when you get to be around songwriters like that, and they kind of put their arm around you a little bit, like they make you feel like you're kind of continuing an important tradition of storytelling that's been, passed down from generation to generation. And so, yeah, I guess that's in one way like my little tip of the hat to Guy, just, as one of the all-time greats whose music I still just treasure and always will. Um, But beyond that, it's I really yeah, there's something about like I it's just I don't know. As long as I had to write, like even when I was a little kid in school, like I loved pencils, and they were making when I was a kid, they were making all kinds of like wild pencils, like that smelled like cinnamon, and had like crazy cool like decorations on them and stuff like that, and then the little pencil sharpener, the little handheld one that creates the little shavings and all
Right.
that kind of stuff. And and I like the idea of, if I look in the trash can, and there's a bunch of pencils that have gone down to the point where I couldn't use them anymore in there. I always feel good about myself. I'm like, man, yeah, you've really been you've been at it, you've been doing it. Look at all these dead pencils in the trash can. Like, good on you,
I
um
love it.
so yeah.
Okay, so again, I have a couple of follow-ups. So you're
Hmm.
not tempted to use the eraser? I mean, it would be so easy to. So okay, so I tell you the pros and cons I hear from songwriters. The
Okay.
advantage of the eraser is that if it's bad, you never have to look at it again, right? It's like it's out of your mind and you never have to see it again. So that's the advantage of the eraser.
Okay.
The advantage of the pen is that you can erase, and so if you cross it out, you always have it there if you if it wasn't as bad as you thought it was, or if you need it later on. So I just love that idea that you're that have the best of both worlds, which is a pencil but not the eraser. Um,
Yeah, I don't know. Something, I never liked erasers, ever. I hated the pink pearl ones, and then they started doing this thing like when I was in middle school, where they would take like these two different colored erasers and kind of twist them together into this
yes,
weird looking thing. And ugh, and I kind of like the act of crossing something out, or or oftentimes what I'll do, even more probably at this point, it's funny now that I'm thinking of this. I used to cross things out. What I do now is I go below the line that I'm not sure about, and in parentheses below that, I write an alternate line, that maybe expresses the same thing in a different way, or has a the rhyming word is kind of is more of a loose rhyme or something, just and almost like, not even to say like, it's either this line or that line, but just to remind myself I wasn't sure about this when I wrote it. And so I have this other line here, and maybe that's more of the idea, or I don't know, but it's kind of like, it's almost like just putting a little asterisk or something next to it, like, I'm going to come back to this, sort of a thing, and see how it feels in a few days, or whatever.
Carl Bromel from My Morning Jacket. I had him on. This is like 10 years ago, and he's exactly what you said. He'll write a
Wow.
line, and if he's not sure of a word, he'll put three words above it
There you go.
on the line and then
Love it.
yeah, but he'd be three words above that one and then try each one. Paper, lined or unlined paper?
Mm. Um, I kind of do both. But I would say mainly I do unlined paper at this point. Like, when I think when you do, I don't know if other people who write songs feel this way, but I feel like once you've done it for long enough that your family and friends, know that's what it's like. Every birthday, every like holiday, it's like, at least a couple of presents are just notebooks, you know, to write songs in. So I've come to yeah, to accept the gift that I've been given, whether the paper is ruled or unruled. And yeah, and I find, what's interesting, when the paper is unlined, I kind of do a lot of other stuff on, like, little doodles and stuff like that on the paper, like next to the lyrics or something, maybe a little picture of what I was thinking of or something when I read, because that's a lot of, for me, like a lot of the stuff I write down is just visualizations I feel like I'm having. Um, so when I write on like lined like composition, I never do that for some reason. I don't know why. I guess it's just the extra space. I'm just like, oh, just fill it in with something.
Okay, so back to something you said earlier. Uh, it's not very rock and roll, but you said you start your day with a glass of water, 8 a.m. petting your cat. So I am fascinated by the ritual of the writer. I mean, I read all these interviews in the Paris Review with prose writers, and I have quirky rituals, like I never ever write and revise in the same chair. It's got to be a different place. Um, I'm also a morning person. I'm not a night person. There are certain things that I have to have with me. So is that, and it's funny because songwriters will say, I have no ritual, and then they'll spend 5 minutes telling me what the ritual is. So which I love it. And it'll dawn on them like, did you just hear what you said? You just went through 5 minutes of telling you what you do, but you have no ritual. So is that important to you?
Yes. Yes. I'm in those moments. Excuse me. In those moments, I'm setting the stage to write a song. I'm setting the trap, you know, to write a song. And what I mean by that is, I might have an idea, and you know, this is something to consider too. It's just like, what is an idea for a song? Um, because in this day and age, I mean, sometimes it's like, if you're working with a certain kind of artist or something like that, like they might say like, oh, I have this idea for a song. Like this happened to a friend of mine recently. We were talking and on the phone, and he said, yeah, I was writing for this other artist, and we were working on a few songs together, and they said that they had this idea for a song. And I said, okay, cool, send it to me. And they sent me the song idea, and they pulled it up, and it was just like a drum machine beat and nothing else.
Wow.
And they were kind of like, well, geez, there's a lot of directions we could go. So I'm not really
Right.
sure if this constitutes an idea, as more of like, oh, this is sort of a drum. Could we write something to this drum track or something? Like, I feel like a song idea, has a lyric behind it, or a melody behind it, or a specific chord um structure, or something behind it. Um, and so when I say song idea, I guess that's what I mean. It's just like when I have a lyrical phrase going or something like that. And so part of the ritual for me in those moments, drinking that water, petting the cat, is just sort of cycling through that phrase in my brain over and over again. And then you see like what pops off of that, like the thought bubbles thing that you were just talking about. It's just like, you know, um, if the idea, it's like, oh, I'm gonna write a country song, and husband and truck, is I now pronounce you husband and truck, and that's my hook line or whatever. And so in that moment of just petting the cat and drinking the water, and I'm also doing like some breath work, breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth, because I want to get the oxygen into my brain. So those nice deep breaths where I'm pulling the air up into my skull is really, getting those juices flowing too. Um, and yeah, and I'm just thinking of that phrase over and over again, and I'm seeing what comes off of that. And oftentimes, whether or not the things that are just coming to my mind naturally are really resonating with me deeply or something like that, I just kind of write them down anyway, almost as like a starting point, you know. And then things just kind of progress from there. Um, to me, it's about like in those moments, really maintaining curiosity, you know, not not having the critic voice yet, allowing that voice to be silent during that time, and just really focusing on what comes, and working with that and seeing where that goes. But the process of getting up, having getting the water going in the system, and doing the breath work, and doing something just really simple and meditative, like petting the cat, or um, which also, like, animals are so wonderful, the way that they give us energy, back, you know. Um, so all of that is contributing to my ability to then turn to the writing process, and start getting things down that have just a very natural flow to them, that feel conversational to me, because I that lyrically speaking, like, that's how I want it to. I want it to feel like I'm just speaking to you,
Yeah.
and not putting on a certain kind of character, or something like that, to you know deliver a line that I wouldn't say in real life. Because I always feel like, for me, I'm not just writing the songs, I'm then going out there and singing them, performing them for people every night, recording them so that people can listen to them and have their own experience with them. And so what's important about that is that I'm believable.
Hmm.
And so I feel I'm at my most believable when my lyrical content feels just very conversational and natural, like something I would just be saying in a conversation.
Yeah. So question about the ritual. Is there a favorite room,
Yeah.
chair? Yeah, what is, like, let's
Yeah.
talk about, because I absolutely have a favorite place. But
Yeah, I live in East Nashville, um, in this part of East Nashville called Inglewood, and I love my neighborhood. It's a really groovy little neighborhood. It's right across the street from this high school. It's called Stratford High School, and I get to, like, if I'm doing yard work or whatever in the fall, I get to hear the marching band practice, and they're awesome. They cover like the Thong Song by Cisco and stuff like that, and they kill it, man. It's so good. It's amazing. Um, but my house is like a ranch style. It's like a long house across just one floor. It's not super big. It's like a smaller kind of ranch style house, 2 bedrooms, like a front living room with some big giant window spaces that, like, the windows are like floor to ceiling, which is really nice. A lot of light, a lot of natural light coming into the house there. And then sort of a dining room. Excuse me. It's sort of a dining room off to the side of that, and then a kitchen right behind that, and then formerly a garage that was converted into a sort of extra room that we use as like a music studio space. So my piano in there, and all my guitars and amps and drums and bass and recording equipment and all that kind of stuff. But the room that I love to go into is is a room like right on the other side of the kitchen. There's a wall that divides that front room I was telling you about with the window space. And on the other side of that room is this little kind of nook of a room where everything in the room is wood. The floor, it's like wooden floor, wood panel, walls, like all the way. It almost looks like you're in a little cabin or something like that, and there's a window space. If you're sitting, I have a couch that kind of goes along the wall. And if you're sitting on the couch, sort of facing where the kitchen is, there's a window space on the side where the sunlight just kind of creeps in through the trees, so you're getting the natural light, but there's also, it's not like super harsh, like, it's just very, yeah, warm and inviting, and like just natural, and sort of peaceful, and the couch is just covered in blankets and like all this. And we actually used to have one of those foam mattress toppers that I got from Target and cut it up into the shape of the couch and put it on the top of the couch with like then a like a comforter over top of that. So it's like this big squishy like marshmallow that you just kind of like sink into in this cool like wood paneled room where like, you know, things are it's kind of the sound is kind of reflective in there. If one of the cats is playing with one of its toys or something, it kind of echoes in the room in this cool way. And yeah, it's just such a it's also where the cat's food and water is. So I know like if I want to get some good cat time in, like this room is like my best shot, at it. Because cats are very independent. Sometimes they're not. You got to give them their space as well and respect that. So I always try to let them come to me and all that. But yeah, the space is just like it's where I start, my writing process every day. It's when I'm not writing, I don't even it's weird, like I don't um I generally start my day like more kind of outside, like going on a run or a walk or a bike ride or something like that. And that room doesn't like factor in the specific way that it does when I'm in one of those times where I'm just like writing like all the time every day. So that room is like really specific to my process of like of those times where I'm just writing all the time and like um yeah, it's like a conduit. It's like a
Yeah.
conduit to that headspace. I can feel it. Even just thinking of it now, it's like I can feel what it's like. I can smell the room. It's all of those things.
Yeah.
So
I love it. So, okay, two more questions. One is the
yeah,
follow-up to that. Um,
yeah,
the first one is you mentioned yard work,
yeah.
and I love that discussion of Agatha Christie once said the best time to write a book is when you're doing the dishes, and 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 the songwriters who tell me they get ideas when they're engaged in monotonous activities. So I know you've worked with Yola. I had her on the podcast, and she said, now she's British, so she said hoovering took me realize few minutes to realize she meant vacuuming, but hoovering, I hear gardening, um, cooking, folding laundry, any any activity that involves unconscious thought lets the conscious thoughts bubble up. I mean, David Byrne said, I remember reading an interview with David Byrne, and he said that the cars are a great time because your brain is engaged, in a conscious activity again, and it lets the unconscious bubble up. So I love that idea. You mentioned yard work, but that's pretty common, and same can be said for walking or anything like that. But why do we get our best ideas in the shower? Because we're not thinking about getting those best ideas. So, um,
Totally.
a long way of that to ask is, are those periods fruitful for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some success. One of my earlier songs that really connected with folks when I was first starting my solo career was a song that I had called "Everything That I Have Is Broken," and I wrote that in my you know uh in my old Volvo station wagon that I had just had for a million years, driving off to the 1,000th gig that month, sort of barely making it there on fumes. And it was just such a great setting for and metaphor for exactly what I was writing about, in that song. And I really, it was one of the few times where I wrote every word of the song without ever writing anything down. Like I was just driving down the road and the chorus and then all of the verses. And um it's a pretty wordy song. And you know somehow I just remembered all of it, like it all stuck. And then it was also one of the few times where I wrote it down on paper for the first time. And I remember, like, I kept going back to look at it, like, there's got to be something that's not right about this. There's no there's no way that this is all good. Um, because I just had never had that experience before. And I don't really know that I have since then, honestly. But yeah, I guess I just got lucky in that moment. But um, yeah, I believe, truly it really, if you can stay open and stay curious, those moments where, you're driving the car, you're pulling weeds, you're brushing your teeth, you're standing in the shower, you're, taking out the garbage. I mean, those are all places that I've written.
Yeah.
you know and so to me, yeah, it's just about like being open to that, and like, not not tying my ritual or my spot where I like to be, physically to write, not like being completely tied down to only those things to create, and being open to times where I'm not in those spaces, and I'm still pulling, things down, and getting them into songs that feel exciting to me.
See, pulling things down. That's what we're saying,
Yeah.
just like that. Back to that, right?
Yes,
Not pulling
indeed.
them up, pulling them down.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. So Ernest Hemingway said all artists, all writers should go to art galleries to get inspired. And I thought that was interesting, kind of the cross-pollination, right?
I do love, visual art, and I'm very inspired by visuals, and the Frisk Art Museum in Nashville, I've probably been to, I don't even know how many times. Because they always have something that's really cool. I remember one time I went there, and this guy had made a mechanical field of wheat blowing in the wind. It was like a machine that like replicated what it looked like when a gust of wind blew through a wheat field. And it was like,
Wow.
I just stood there looking at, I mean, I don't know. This was years ago too. I might have been stoned or something. But I remember standing there and just looking at this thing for like what felt like forever, and just being like, wow, man, I can't believe this guy like thought to do this even. Um, so yeah, I get it certainly from the written word still, but like I'm kind of more all over the place with where I pull from at this point.
And how does an art gallery, because that's very common. I hear that all the time.
Sure.
But how does an art gallery inspire a song? I could see how maybe movies would because there are lines you hear,
Yeah.
plots, but I don't know the answer to that. But I do. That's very common. But I'd love to know why, how art inspires song when there's really, except for maybe the images. If you're a songwriter that's writing vivid imagery, I could
Sure.
see that. But wow, I love that idea. I just don't know why it is.
I love the context, that you get from a gallery. They have a little cards there that sort of will give you insight to the process maybe behind, and I think creative, there's something to, no matter what kind of creative you are, I think there's something to be gained, something to be gleaned from recognizing the creative processes that exist across all forms, of art, and then seeing, what parts of those processes that maybe you're less familiar with resonate with you, and finding out whether or not those could be fodder for, a song idea, or even just a way to approach writing a song. So it's kind of a for me, it's kind of a multifaceted, opportunity to consider, the kind of process that might be different from my own, from which I might be able to take something and incorporate, but then also just the pure aesthetic of beauty, of a human taking, an experience that they had of joy, of love, of sadness, of pain, and translating that into something beautiful, I think you learn a lot about what is possible in terms of the ways in which you can be creative by just sort of examining the processes of what other people are going through to create what they create.
And that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget my book, Desolation, a heavy metal memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari, that is me, comes out June 25th on Hachette Books. Mark is a good friend of mine. He is one of the guitarists in the band Lamb of God, and this is his memoir. It's a damn good book, if I do say so myself. But again, that book is out June 25th on Hachette Books. You can pre-order it now everywhere, your favorite online bookstore. So be sure to do that. The site, Songwriters on Podcast, contains all of the archived episodes of the podcast. Of course, you can find them on all streaming platforms as well, but they're also on the site. I only have had the podcast for about I don't think even 2 years. Before that, all of the interviews were transcribed, and that took a lot of work. And that's why I started the podcast. So if you want to read the interviews that I did before the podcast, they are on Songwriters on Podcast as well. There are about 200 of them going back to 2010. So check those out. If you want to get a hold of me, Ben at songwritersonprocess.com, or fill out a form on the website. I'm here for your questions, your complaints, your concerns, or your interview suggestions. I'd love getting those as well. So hit me up. I will try to respond. So that's it, everyone. Have a great day and see you next time.